Today's episode is being recorded in the Goodman Library of the Oxford Union. The Oxford Union is a debating society which has hosted a wealth of illustrious speakers over its hundreds of years of history, and today it allows students to come face to face with some of the most important intellectuals on the planet and listen to and sometimes even debate them. I myself have debated at the Oxford Union before, as you may have seen. They're currently running a fundraiser to help restore their Grade 2 listed building, and there's a link in the description if you want to help out. You were just on a panel for Unheard, talking about whether modern romance is dead. Was that the topic?
That was the title.
How did it go?
It was really good fun. I mean, personally speaking, it was great to be in a room. You know, I guess I got here by writing online. I'm behind the laptop typing away. It was nice to be in a room full of people talking, seeing their faces. And I guess you've said the same thing, like the best part of your job is speaking in rooms full of people. So it was good fun. And I think, as far as the subject of the event goes, it was very, very good, very revealing, I think, about how things are.
Is modern romance dead? Was that the...
Or just is romance dead? Is romance dead?
Because a lot of people talk about, like, romance in the modern world, or, like, modern dating, or, like, modern this, modern that. What do you think people are getting at when they say modern romance,
Good
modern
question.
dating?
I see. Well, I think it's when they say modern romance, they mean romance now, as opposed to how it was 50, 100, 500 years ago, or at least as we think of it. Right, so modern romance means dating apps, primarily. I think that's the thrust of it, and then you add to that the kind of broader sort of socio-political quakings through the manosphere, toxic masculinity, and these issues are kind of, if you like, the icing on the cake. But I feel like the fundament is basically just.
I mean, we tend to romanticize romance, especially of the past, and it kind of feels like something's different, but do you think it's purely a mechanistic difference, or do you think people are actually thinking differently about what romance is?
So I think it's definitely changed, and I will say why, but I also want to caveat that by kind of giving the caveat I always give, which is that the closer you look at how things are now and how they were in the past, the more you realise how little things have changed. I mean, or the overarching, the main impression I get from reading history is that nothing ever really changes. The things we complain about now and the way we complain about them are exactly the same as people have complained about them throughout all of history, even in terms of romance and love. You know, I sort of think maybe all material progress is an illusion, and it makes us think things are changing when really human nature is unchanging.
Yes,
and we're
I
at the centre
agree.
of this vortex of kind of material distractions. That being said, I do think from time to time certain systems, certain technologies come along that either emphasise or de-emphasise bits of that unchanging human nature. So, one way that online dating, I think, has fundamentally changed romance. I mean, there's a load of obvious ways, I guess, but one thing I found particularly interesting is the nature of communication. All right, once upon a time, if you wanted to talk to someone who wasn't in the same room as you could call them, of course, I suppose, but it was a lot more common to write letters. Yeah, and if you look at any historical figure, anyone you admire from the past, you look at their biography, it's all letters, right? It's excerpts from a letter to their father, to their brother, to their agent, to their colleague, to their friend, to their professor, and of course to their lovers. And I don't know if you've read many love letters from the past, but they're usually, I mean, some of them are pretty prurient, you know, there's some famous cases of that, but on the whole, they're a lot more heartfelt, meaningful, and more detailed than the way we tend to text these days. And that's not to say people in the past were more considerate or sort of any better than us, but the technology forces you to do things differently. If you have to sit down in a room on your own with a piece of paper, right, and you're writing this to your loved one, to someone you're courting, let's say, right, so you alone in a room with a pen and a bit of paper, you've got to actually look inside yourself a bit more in order to write something out, right? You have this instantaneous back and forth, you know, like, hi, what are you doing today, how's your day, that immediacy is gone, and I think that forces you to actually interrogate your feelings much deeper. No, I don't know how many people these days have actually sat down and tried to write a paragraph about the person they love or think they love, and you learn far more by doing that. You know, writing is a kind of thinking, and having lost that aspect now with the way, not just dating, I suppose, but all messaging, I think the loss of letter writing as a whole, I'm not lamenting it for you know, for the sort of romantic image of, you know, folding up the envelope and giving it to postmen and all that crap. No, it's just the purely technical side of how we interact with the technology. Letter writing, I think, has made us a lot less introspective. I guess we're more narcissistic than ever, but we're not introspective. There's a difference between introspection and narcissism. There's a difference between looking at yourself, curating this dating profile, and then always having images of yourself on your mind and trying to decide how you look. But there's a difference between that and sitting down and thinking, God, what do I think? What do I feel? So I think that's one way to change.
A friend of mine once said that, like, he was on dating apps and then he sort of just gave them up or deleted them, and said that he realised that dating apps were more about who likes you than who you like.
Sure.
And it is very sort of self-centered in that respect. A lot of people will use dating apps for validation, essentially, just to check that they've still got it. Are people still swiping? Do people still like me? That's something which you can't really get in such an immediate way in the past. You could kind of walk down the street and see if people are looking at you, but there's no just immediate way to check. Do people currently find me attractive? And
Yeah, it's a shortcut.
it's got to be doing a number on people's psychology. I think the letter writing is interesting in that, like, when you write a letter, you have to create the entire message all together. It's almost like having a conversation with somebody, but each person gets to speak for 10, 20 minutes at a time. It changes the nature of what you're saying, because in a conversation, including a text conversation, the other person dictates the direction of your thought. You say writing is a kind of thinking, and if the other person is constantly inputting and responsive to every single sentence, they are dictating the way that you're thinking. Conversations, I've sometimes compared them to being a little bit like a chess match, in that basically every chess match starts pretty much the same. There are incredibly common openings that, sometimes people do something a little bit strange, but it's pretty limited. And once you get past the first 4 or 5 moves, then you start getting into new territory, and near the end of a chess game, you're in a position that probably no other chessboard has ever been in the history of, like, mankind. And conversations work a bit like that. It's interesting how they all tend to start with the sort of, hey, how's it going? Or some variant of that, do you push the king's pawn or the queen's pawn? Do you say hi? Do you say good morning? And they go off in these directions. But of course it's responsive to what the other player does. And writing a letter is a bit like taking out that other side of the board and just being able to place the pieces on the chessboard at the end game wherever you want them straight away. And so it's much more of a considered and individual way of having a conversation. It allows you to sort of fully express everything that you wanted to say. Why don't people do that anymore?
Well, because the way we have always lived is that we fall to the lowest common denominator, or if you like, we fall to the most convenient denominator, and whatever's easiest, that is what we do, right? So it's easy to sit around here saying, oh no, what a shame that men don't wear suits anymore. What a shame that, we all drive rather than walking or taking, cycling. What a shame that we all text instead of writing letters. But it's easier, right? And we always, it's just in our nature to do what is easier. I guess it's sort of hundreds of millions of years of evolution are very hard to override. And just because it's easy, like it is easier to text, right? I've never written you a letter. I consider you a good friend. I've never written you a letter. You've never written me one, but like, maybe I should have done. Probably I should have done, but look, I haven't.
I hardly even respond to your text.
That is true as well. Because it's convenient, right? But but funny enough, this is really important. I think this touches on the broader thing about dating and dating apps, is that they are, as a whole, not just in terms of this writing thing we're talking about, which is quite narrow, but as a whole, they're just more convenient, and that is why they suck and why no one likes it, because convenience. We're drawn to it almost against our will, kind of compelled by convenience, right? We just love. That's why we all go to supermarkets, right? Once upon a time, you would have had, the greengrocers and the florists and the butchers and the guy selling nuts and the other one selling the cobbler and the shoe shine. All these different things. You go down a high street in some little village. There's like 50 different places you have to go to get what you need. These days, we just go to Tesco, or in your case, I suppose Waitrose or something.
I'm a Tesco's guy.
Yeah.
Have you ever?
But sorry, but you see my point. That like whatever's convenient, we're drawn to it, and dating apps are just so convenient.
I don't
and
think they're
therefore,
convenient.
they're also pretty boring. I think that's my biggest gripe with them, and I think people would agree, even those who use them a lot and maybe even had success. Look, I know couples who met on dating apps and they're wonderful and they're happy and they're very much in love. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think that the bigger issue here is the convenience and the way it sort of systematizes romance. This was my big that I spoke
Also
about. on the panel.
convenience
I don't know
and
if
boring
I'll
go
maybe I'll
hand
just
in
talk about
hand.
this. Like the way it turns love and romance into something that you can schedule, right? You know, people get home, okay, I'll go on the apps for half an hour. I'll see what happens. Okay, yeah, great, I've got a date. You know, it's my third date in this month. It's been a good month then. Okay, and I'll put it in for you Thursday, 6 p.m. And I think the idea that you can schedule love or romance is very obviously not just wrong, but pretty sad and pretty tragic, I think, because it is denying people what romance and love should give you, which is something I think by definition beyond the boundaries of ordinary life, of being scheduled. Right now, I have this line I say to my friends sometimes: it's not love if it's convenient. You know, if it's real love, if it's real romance, then that means you've got to sacrifice things. It means you're going to miss meetings. It means you're going to be up late and you're going to be waking up tired, or whatever the hell it is. It means you're going to have to, you know, you drop out of something you said you're going to go to because you want to go and see this other person instead. That's love, that's romance. It's not convenient, but dating apps make us think, okay, it's something that we can schedule, and then the way we talk about it on the podcasts, on the shows, online, all this dating advice, bloody hell, it's pretty pretty disgusting, I think, and it's a shame. Disgusting is a strong word, but I mean, it's just a shame that people talk about romance and dating and give advice as if it's a game that can be played. It's a system which, if you fine-tune, just if you twist all the dials in the right way, then you're going to find. Obviously, usually it comes from all this advice is kind of men speaking to men. Men have been led to believe that if they, as I say, if they fine-tune themselves and if they schedule everything correctly, then they'll, I don't know, find love, I guess. But who believes that? I don't know. I don't know if anyone really believes that.
Optimizing for the dating market. The dating market is a phrase that gets thrown around quite a lot, and think about that for a second. The dating market is the sort of a consumerist analogy for relationships, and from what you're saying, it sounds like love is not something to which a consumerist analogy could ever appropriately apply.
Yeah, no, not love. I mean, it's funny you mention. I guess we are literally anyone who uses the apps, dating apps. We are customers if we're doing it. I mean, they are corporations, right? And we're using it. We get shown adverts. They have a system which they use to make money. So if you are using, you are literally not even speaking as an analogy, but you're literally a customer in the dating market. That being said, of course, I'm sure you're very perceptive and well-read listeners will know dating markets aren't exactly a new thing. You know, if you look, I don't think in the 16th century there was much in the way of romance in these marriages that are organised between the big aristocratic families. You know, it was purely, or at least chiefly, about power and about what was most expedient, which is in a way even more what's the word? Even more materialistic, or even more consumerist.
Oh yeah.
You know,
but that's why the love stories that are popular from these time periods and onwards tend to have this motif of something which isn't allowed.
Exactly.
Not
Yes,
because it's like taboo, not because you're gay, but because it's out of line with the family organisation.
And therefore it's real, and therefore it's real love. One of the most famous medieval romances, I'm sure you know it, Tristan and Isolde. So I can't remember. This is one of these romances which is written again and again and again. It's actually set in Britain, but I think the most famous version of it is a German epic written in the 13th century. Wagner made it into an opera, you know, one of his most beautiful operas that changed music forever with famous Tristan chord. Anyway, but that's about a knight who's sent by the king to go and escort his bride-to-be. Right then, but then so he goes to escort this bride-to-be, and Tristan and the bride Isolde fall in love. And I think it all ends pretty tragically, I think. I can't remember exactly. Maybe there were different endings. But the point being, yes, right? That's good. It's literally, even in those days, people recognised that this dating market, this marriage market, wasn't about love, and therefore the stories they read about love were something forbidden, as they are today. I mean, every single song is about love, right? Every single film is about love. Why do we go to the cinema and watch these TV shows and films about love and listen to songs about love? You know, it's very rare that they're about people who met on dating apps, I guess. And when they are, it's usually comedy, I suppose, because it can be quite funny. And also, sorry, on that point about historical parallels, that we're not talking about some sort of idealized, lost, way society of love that we've now replaced with our dating apps. It was maybe no different in the past. Look at Henry VIII and his wives. The famous case of the portrait of Catherine of Aragon, I guess. She seems very beautiful. Henry meets her in person and he says, "Oh dear, you don't look quite like you did in the portrait I saw of you."
He was catfished.
Yes, exactly. He was literally, and I suppose it was easier to do it in those days than it is now. So it's not like things were perfect in the past, and I really don't mean to say that at all. That doesn't mean there are things that we've lost that we can learn from, or at least parallels to draw, which help us see most clearly what we're missing. Because I think everyone would agree that we're missing something, right? How often do you hear somebody say, "You know what? Romance in the 21st century is great. I love the apps. I love dating apps. I love the way we represent ourselves online. All this stuff." Do people say that? I guess not.
But has anyone ever said that? What the reason I'm
Yeah,
asking
that's
about the
exactly
concept of
my
modern love
point.
is that we were just talking
Since
about how
when
it
we're
used
supposed to be
that these
satisfied?
love stories were real because they were against the typical structure of families deciding who their children are going to marry. In those days, people wouldn't have said, "Oh, I love how our romantic system is set up, that everyone's, marrying the proved." But, obviously it's a unique situation we're in. I think that, I understand when people say nothing ever changes and history repeats itself and human nature is still the same, but I do think that there are some genuinely revolutionary moments to pinpoint in human history. One of them is the invention of the internet. Its revolutionary effect on communication technology. And I think that might do something qualitative to how we love each other. But it's never been the case that people have looked around and gone like, "I'm really happy with how this is all going. I'm really happy with the state of modern love."
So exactly. I mean, no one's ever said that about anything. I mean, there's a line in my upcoming book, which is something like when you read history, you learn that nobody was ever happy because of their times. They were always happy despite, or at least notwithstanding, their times. And I think that's as true now as it ever was.
Yes.
Yeah, I should mention the book that you've got coming out. It will be available for pre-order probably at some point, maybe even right now.
Hopefully by the time people listen to this, it will be available.
However it's announced, the link will be in the description.
Yeah, and we can flash the cover.
That would be great.
Over there we can have it, appearing now as I say these words somewhere
in between us.
Gorgeous, isn't it?
It's a beautiful looking cover that you've got there. Brilliant use of colour. You were just speaking a moment ago about supermarkets, right, and the sort of convenience overcoming our desire for beauty. It is interesting how everybody simultaneously knows that convenience is destructive of meaning, purpose, beauty,
Is it?
all of this kind of stuff,
Everything.
and yet choose it every single time. And it's the depressing thing about the swift tide of modernity is that it is irreversible. Once cars have been invented, you just can't go back to a horse and carriage unless it's some kind of novelty with some poor abused horse in New York City running around Central Park. You can't go back. How then do we regain what was so good about the love of the past now? Things like the letter writing, things like that feeling that absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's if you spend so much time away, when you finally see each other, it's beautiful and romantic. Whereas today, now it's I've got to text every single day, and I've got to check my phone, and I've got to, and it sort of has a totally different kind of vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you? Well, maybe we can actually talk about that convenience stuff as it applies more broadly to society, to art, to architecture.
Oh yeah, well, in fact, have you heard of the fake clock towers on supermarkets in the UK?
I've not. I mean, I've seen it. No,
So you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, my Morrisons. I remember where I grew up, and there was the Scunthorpe. There was the Morrisons. I remember every time we drove into town.
Yes. So they've got these They're quite beautiful. They look like village churches.
Yeah, no,
And they've got a clock tower, and it's like a Tesco. It's like a supermarket. It's like the equivalent of, like, I guess, like a Walmart or something, or Target in the US. Have you ever noticed those clocks don't work?
Never noticed.
Those clocks, like, they basically never tell the correct time because
I
they're not
noticed.
actually clock towers. What happened was, in the 1970s, a town in Essex, I pulled it up here, called South Woodham Ferrers, was being laid out in Essex, and there were, like, strict rules about what you're allowed to do because it's a nice little town, and so it kind of, I don't know the exact rules, it kind of had to look a bit like a barn, it had to use a particular brickwork, it had to be in keeping with the style of the town. And when Tesco come along and want to build a supermarket, supermarkets are known for being these horrible utilitarian buildings, and they said, no, you're not allowed, you have to make it fit in. So they basically faked this, like, beautiful looking building. It looks like a barn with a clock tower. And because they didn't actually care for keeping the time, most of those clocks just don't even work anymore. I'm not even sure if they worked in the first place. That's why if you ever drive past one of these supermarkets, see if the clock actually works, because half the time they're not even there. And this is an example of somebody sticking their foot down and saying, I know supermarkets are more convenient, but recognizing the trade-off that has brought.
Mm-hmm.
One trade-off is, of course, you don't go to the market and your individual salesman, and obviously that would be a massive pain if you actually need to get your shopping done. But there was something probably romantic about walking around, saying hello to your local butcher, you know. But another thing that has been lost is the fact that because it's so utilitarian, it's just like one big building, and it's a conglomerate that doesn't care about beauty. And so this is one example of how, knowing that, you can fight against it by saying, okay, you can build a Tesco, but you have to make it look like a clock tower. And the clock doesn't even need to bloody work, I don't care, just make it look beautiful. Is there something like that that we could do to bring back love and letter writing, all of that kind of good stuff?
I guess that's a wonderful example, and the kind of thing we should probably do more often. I mean, I think this conversation is so really overdone. You know, every single time you open your web browser or go on whatever BBC News, there's an article about how dating apps are causing all this harm and sending everyone crazy and stuff. So again, we all know it's a problem. How do you solve it? Well, I think in a way the good news is that it's not that hard, right? I mean, things are now also better than they've ever been before in so many different ways, and in many ways all you have to do is just not use one, right? You just don't use the app, and that forces you to actually live in the real world. Same with like the supermarket thing. Like I can sit here moaning about supermarkets, but if I really wanted to, there are still butchers. I could go to the butcher to get my sausages rather than going to Tesco, whatever it is. Same with dating. You refuse to use the apps, right? It's scary. You've got to be bold. You've got to be courageous. You've got to live in the real world and take chances and see what the hell happens. But it can be done, and it works. I mean, we all know people who've met their partners in real life, which is, again, such a strange phrase to use, right? The idea that you have to specify, oh yeah, we met in real life. My partner and I have a very, very odd thing that we can now say in 2025. I don't think it's any more complicated. I mean, there may be some issues further down the line, and at the panel I did, there was some really interesting discussions where there was some men in the audience who I was kind of saying this, you know, like just forget the apps, go out there into the real world and live and see what happens, and be willing to embrace the inconvenience of romance. And then some men in the audience were like, well, we feel uncomfortable approaching women and that sort of thing. And then we got into a whole, I mean, that kind of took the discussion in a different direction. I guess it's not really the kind of thing you normally talk about on your channel, although it's adjacent, I suppose. Issues of masculinity and toxic masculinity, and the relationship between men and women. I don't know if you want to talk about that. It's certainly a very very interesting, but it's very depressing.
What do you think is going on? I mean, you mentioned earlier this, you said disgusting when you described, I can't remember exactly what you were describing, but it was something about the way that...
It was about how when dating has been turned into something that you schedule.
Yeah, and like...
It's the whole sort of podcaster, for want of a better word. I realise that's low-hanging fruit to say that, but the sort of mentality of like, you wake up at this time, and you do this, and then you do this, and the whole productivity, the whole spectrum of productivity, which on the whole, I guess, has been good for people. But the whole productivity way of being and thinking, which I guess has taken over the world, or at least the West, I guess, in the last 10 years, has pushed out. And I think that's why when I used the disgusting, I meant the way romance has been turned into something you can schedule.
What's so resonant for so many people then, like with things like the manosphere and the dating market and the optimizing for approaching women and all of this kind of stuff. Like, well, why is that exciting to people if the thing that used to excite people were stories about people sneaking off in the night to elope with their lover?
Sure, I mean, those stories still do excite people. I mean, just look at what's on in the cinema, the kind of things people watch when they're at home on Amazon Prime or whatever it is, wherever we get our TV these days. The romantic stuff hasn't changed much, I don't think, in the last 3,000 years, since the dawn of storytelling. Romance stories have been more or less the same. And why do you find it exciting? Like, why does it appeal? The kind of the manosphere way of being. I think, gosh, where to begin? I think one is that the alternative probably hasn't been presented like this. That is kind of about education. Like, I'm not saying I'm exactly a paragon of romantic love and sort of a different kind of masculinity. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I definitely have a different view to a lot of people my age, a lot of gentlemen our age, and that's probably just because when I was a young boy, I spent most of my time in second-hand bookshops, like reading these old books, and I think through them, I got a kind of education, like unwittingly, but I got a different kind of education than I would have got had I spent all those formative years watching sitcoms or as young people do now, just scrolling Instagram. I think without meaning to, I sort of stumble into a slightly different, slightly more old-fashioned, but I think fundamentally timeless way of thinking about things. Again, I don't uphold all these values, and I'm not even saying that it's about values, but just ways of thinking about the world and ways of being. So I think it's to do with education. If people haven't ever seen anything different, how could they know that there is anything different?
So who writes well on love?
Oh gosh. Okay. Now we're talking. Well, I remember one of the first things I read that really moved me on love was Dante, so the Divine Comedy. You all know it, which I think is always kind of misunderstood. I mean, the whole thing. So Dante, from Florence, born in 1265, he falls in love with the young Beatrice Portinari. He's absolutely devoted to her. She dies very, very young. Dante later marries a woman called Gemma, I think, and has children. We only know about Gemma because of the historical records. Dante never mentions her once in all his writings. It's Beatrice he loves. And the whole of, as far as I can tell, the whole of the Divine Comedy is basically his attempt to reshape Christian theology around his love for Beatrice to justify the fact that he seems to see God through her. It's remarkable. But something else he wrote first, I think when he was 25. Well, no, he was 27. He wrote something called La Vita Nuova, The New Life. And it's kind of a poetical treatise. It was partly written to introduce a new style of poetry that him and his friends were coming up with in Florence in the 13th century. This kind of vernacular Italian style of poetry, which was then pretty revolutionary. It was partly to justify that, but it was also about his love for Beatrice, and he was writing about. And there's this one sort of funny scene in La Vita Nuova when he describes going to a party, I think, or some sort of the 13th century Florentine equivalent, and Beatrice is there with her friends, and he's nearby, and they all look at him, and they're kind of whispering, and they start laughing, and he just bursts into tears, and like leaves the party and throws himself on his bed. And I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but I thought that particular little scene was beautiful because it kind of made me realise, hold on, this is the kind of thing that happens now. We haven't changed that much. People still get so ashamed, and they overthink things, and they worry when they see the person they like. They're kind of laughing, and think, oh no, they must be laughing at me. Anyway. I think Dante writes very, very beautifully on love, and he wrote about it with such a tenderness and a gravity and a weight, which I think we're kind of losing now. I mean,
that's what's missing from all of this manosphere crap, is like the tenderness. Which is supposed to be about love, because I suppose tenderness is like soft and mushy and feminine and does not optimize you for competing for the top 20% of women on the Tinder app or whatever. And there is something to be said for the fact that if you just try to do the romantic thing, if you're like, no, I'm not like these other guys, I'm tender and I'm soft, then it is actually just a bit mushy and unattractive. So it's kind of
no, I agree. It's got to be authentic.
It's sort of a difficult thing to.
But I think this romantic stuff, as we're calling it, is authentic. The point is, it's an authentic access to a way of thinking and a way of loving and a way of feeling that the current manosphere system doesn't give you access to if you're a man. It's not that you're doing it for the sake of it. The point is, these romantic gestures I mean, letters and like flowers, and I mean, these are all very, very sort of stereotypical examples. You know, so it's sort of contrasting that with the whole. Yeah, there are plenty of stereotypes from either side, but anyway, these grand romantic gestures aren't about doing it for the sake of doing it in order to be romantic. The point of them is that they're kind of symbols of deeper feelings, which are harder to give voice to, which are harder to explain, right? That doesn't the meaning of any of these things that we do, but and then at that point you can kind of talk about the whole meaning of symbols and tradition and even beauty, which we're losing across society. This is the rule of modernity and the rule of convenience, is that you lose everything, and I guess that's the value of these romantic gestures, is that they would allow men to the tenderness thing is so interesting.
Who else then writes well on love? Because I love everything you just said about Dante. I think, but wait, what is it you said that, like, he seems to sort of reorient Christian theology?
He reshaped Christian theology around his love for
He
Beatrice.
said something about how he like saw God through her or something, which is just such.
But what happens? He goes through hell.
Yeah.
Goes through purgatory. He meets him at the top of purgatory, right? Virgil says, farewell, Dante, I can't help you anymore. Here's Beatrice, your great love.
Yes.
She's going to take you to heaven.
Yeah.
It's basically, I mean, imagine the magnitude of that passion. You know, the word passion. I think it's funny, like, words are so interesting. In this whole, the dating advice, dating market culture, all these books about them, all these podcasts about them, like, think of the words that we use. I don't think words, I don't know, I guess I don't listen to it too long, so maybe you do, I'm not sure, but words like passion or adventure, I don't know if they're used very often, but I
They're
watch,
used in the context
I
of
have to
work
pick up Will Smith
mostly.
videos every single evening, and I don't think I've heard those words used once.
tenderness and sweetness and gentleness. But these are parts of the human condition also, and I think they're a major part of masculinity. I mean, there's this wonderful. I was talking to someone about it the other day. It seems like the kind of conversation I would have had with you, but I don't think it was. Maybe it was David. Anyway, well, if you take this sort of the ideal modern man as if you sort of took AI and said, please, well, a person could do it, of course, I guess, but listen to all these podcasts, watch all these videos, and like create the ideal modern man. What would he be like? How would he act? And how would he behave? Then you take that and compare it to the medieval ideal of a knight. And again, I know we're talking in ideals here, and I recognise that not all medieval knights were like this, but at least in terms of what they said they wanted to be like, right, and sort of humility and modesty and gentleness were major parts of the code of chivalry, right? You know, when you read these romances, these knights were in some sense hyper masculine because they walked around with swords, wearing armour, literally fighting to the death with other men and going to war. But at the same time, in the presence of women and even in the presence of other men, they could be very tender, and they were supposed to be, they're expected to be able to compose poetry and write songs. And that element of gentleness and tenderness, which is present in the medieval ideal of masculinity, has kind of disappeared now. And
but people famously find artsy people attractive, especially like stereotypically women find men who like can write poetry, play the guitar, like have
play the guitar, yeah,
these kinds of
I don't know.
artistic types of skills. I mean, they also find people attractive who are like good at sports and stuff. That's probably more like manosphere-y, like dominance and physical fitness and kind of stuff. But there's also that sort of soft attractiveness to the person who does art, and there's something that seems to be tying together like the arts and romance. And I wonder if like you think that being in touch with art and music and poetry and stuff makes you more like able to access this kind of
Well,
love.
that
you're
makes
talking
you a
about, or if
better
it's,
human
like, the other way
being.
around.
No, I think
being in love
I think
makes
it
you
does.
appreciate the arts.
The things you consume like completely change who you are, right? And like, I mean, God, this is not very hard to imagine the difference. But let's say, you're a young man, and your view of women has been shaped by films, TV shows, Instagram, and probably if you're a young man, by pornography. Okay, that's how you've come to understand women before you've probably ever really spoken to one in real life in any serious way. Now imagine if instead of those things, your view of them had been shaped by, and maybe it sounds strange to people that this could even be possible. Maybe it sounds strange or pathetic, but it's true. Imagine your view had been shaped by poetry, and by the great novels, and by art as well. But imagine the difference. I mean, like, plenty of art is pretty pornographic. I think a lot of 19th, 18th century art is sort of the closest they could get to it before it's possible. But that being said, if your view of women has been shaped by pornography or paintings, I mean, look at some of the great pre-Raphaelite painters. Well, here in Oxford, in Oxford Union, just do that in the old library. You've got the great murals by a bunch of pre-Raphaelite painters. Look at Rossetti's painting of women. Get Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Look at his paintings of his beloved Lizzie Siddal. You know, he loved her, and she died. And just the sheer, I'll use this, was again, the magnitude of passion and devotion in his paintings of her. It can't fail to move you if you've got a heart. And if you're a young man and the way you've been taught by the things you've consumed to shape women, if that's Rossetti's paintings of Elizabeth Siddal, or it's pornography, right, that's going to affect how you act, how you think, what you even believe is possible, what you know to be possible.
What you desire.
Well, yeah, what you desire. I think so.
What you think you desire.
But I think what you think you desire, because these are aberrations, but I think they're aberrations, and you can come back to the true course. And I think men maybe deep down know this. They are deeply dissatisfied. Pornography is worse for you than smoking. It's just about the worst thing there is, I think, for a man. I think it's terrible. And so going back to the original question of, I guess, how to find this alternative
Not
way.
to mention how bad it is for women as well. That's another thing that kind of, I think, gets lost in the discussion, in the sort of manosphere discussion. Pornography comes up a lot, and how utterly harmful it is. Well, why is it so harmful? Well, it gives you erectile dysfunction, and it ruins your interactions with women, and it makes you, naturally less able to approach it. It's like, have we also just forgotten that it is also just this hub of trafficking of women? I think like the badness for women often gets left out of that.
Oh, completely.
And that's the main thing.
That's the main thing, sure.
Well, there's
You're
hopefully
right, that
something
must
that is
have
damaging
effect. I
to
mean,
one
there's a lot of
sex that is
discussion
not
about
damaging to the
how
other.
pornography and
Because
our sort of
really-
cultural addiction to it has affected the way people have sex. It changes what people expect. Women report men choking them and just expecting that that's just the normal thing to do and not even asking first, or this kind of stuff. And that's new. And it has to be pornography. But I don't think I really hear discussed how it might affect, like, love. Do you think that the topic of sex is as attached to the topic of romance historically as it is today? Seems like we've got less of a taboo about talking about sex, and so maybe not so much in the past, or if so, kind of implicitly.
It's less to be now, but it's always been there implicitly, always in all the art. And maybe the beauty of that art and literature is, and way of thinking about it, is that taboos serve a very powerful purpose, right? Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. Look at, of course, the thing where you don't say Voldemort's name. It makes him more scarier. But sometimes taboos, I think, help you, because some things kind of shouldn't be said or can't be said. Nietzsche had those great lines, translated apparently inaccurately, but very lovingly by Harold Bloom. Something like, what is it? It's something like, as soon as you speak, then the feeling that those words are giving voice to is already dead. Something along those lines. Like, if you say something, it's already dead within you. To be able to say it means it's gone, and it's kind of like this highly troubling idea, but there's some truth to that. And I think some things ellipsis is so powerful. It's such a powerful rhetorical and literary tool. So, like, imagine there's a shot of you on Friday night, like, just leaving work. I mean, there's a film about Alex Connor, shot Friday, leaves work, shot Monday morning. You're like flat out on the sofa, in a mess. It's like, okay, he's had a wild weekend. You understand that just like that. You don't need to show it all. And in a way, it's actually more effective just to show the two shots.
Do you call that ellipsis?
I think that's called ellipsis.
Yeah, I've noticed that in one area I keep seeing that kind of thing. I think this is how to avoid cheesiness in films. I realised, this might be a bit of a detour, but like, I was thinking about how to write scenes that involve like quite dramatic moments of culmination, either telling someone that their child has died at war, or finally saying "I love you," or asking somebody out, or something like that. And it's very difficult not to make it cheesy and clunky, because in real life those moments are cheesy and clunky. I don't know if you've ever had to tell someone that someone they know has died. There's no like proper formal way to do it. It is just a bit sort of like bit of a bug at this really. It's clunky and it makes for difficult viewing. And so unless you're just going to own that, the easiest way to do it is to show the car coming up the driveway, and the woman whose husband has been at war looking shocked, and then immediately it just cuts to her crying, because you sort of know what it means. I can't remember exactly who I was talking to recently about how this is really well done in the UK Office, when Tim asks Dawn out. They've got like the microphones on, and he finally builds up the confidence. He walks in, he says, "Come into this room," and they just take off the microphones. And then he just like walks out and just sort of looks at the camera and goes like, "She said no, by the way," and then walks off. And it's so much more powerful because you don't have to try to invent what would be this
exactly right
clunky.
Because words aren't actually the same thing as the thing we're feeling. We sort of think word, but they're not the same thing as the great, ancient Greek philosopher Cratylus knew. He thought words were so useless that he just famously waggled his fingers and he refused to talk.
Yeah, and the thing that makes for good TV is conveying the feeling, which in a real situation like that, where somebody is, asking somebody out or something, the only person who's feeling that thing is going to be them, and the words will never actually be a proper representation of the feeling. And so if you try to represent it on TV with the words, you get something
It's not just clunky. I think it's always disappointing. It's always just unfulfilling. It's like, like fulfillment is such an interesting concept, I guess, in art and in real life. Yeah, it's always disappointing to show it, I think. Which is why, going back to where we started, which is why ellipsis is so powerful, which is why taboos around, so like, even when you read the Victorian stuff, they're a famously prudish society, and I guess we're kind of still raised in that anti-Victorian mindset which has dominated this country for the past 100 years, where we're sort of raised to view them as very hypocritical, because on the surface they have this morality where they refused to, like, for example, when they translated the ancient Romans from Latin into English, the Romans were very filthy in everything they wrote, right? When the Victorians translated them, they sanitized the language, just Catullus, whatever. But even when you read the Victorian stuff, it's very evident. If you actually use your brain a little bit, you can see when they're referencing things that are taboo, like sex, and I think it in a way is what makes that historical art maybe more powerful and more meaningful and more exciting. Look at like Wagner, again, to mention him. His operas, especially the Ring Cycle, they're punctuated by moments that are very, very, I guess, erotic. Like at the end of, I guess Siegfried, when he goes to the mountaintop and walks through the flames and he's united with Brunhilde, right? You don't see them making love on stage,
knowing each other in the biblical sense.
Yeah, exactly. But it's implied. But then the kind of mythical setting of it, and the way they sing about their feelings, and the nature of the union, is really impactful. And I think more ultimately moving and impactful than if in the 21st century, of course, if we make a TV show or a film where we just show everything. Really, we're very, very prurient now. We like the details of these things, and I guess it's just disappointing. And worst of all, I think it's a bit boring. It's boring to just put the thing down as it is. It's the beauty of ellipsis, and it's the beauty of all these older forms of art, where there's always something more you can't quite see, you can't quite say. And I think that elevates romance and love. And certainly what we like now is in the 21st century. I don't think we were raised to talk about it in these terms, and culturally there's very little belief in the transcendental power of love, I think, now, which is a shame, because it's there. And I think people know this as well. People know it's there, but we don't talk about it. I mean, it's hard to talk about, but you think you can direct people towards it or away from it. And I think to take everything we've just been talking about and return to dating apps, it's just a little bit boring.
When you just talked about this censorship in translations by the Victorians, it made me think of. I just spoke to Dermot McCulloch, the historian of the church, and in his recent book about a history of sex in Christianity,
Wow.
he points out that there's this verse in the book of Ezekiel, which says something like, she lusted after her lovers whose genitalia were like donkeys and whose emissions were like those of a horse. It's like this very explicit sort of donkey language describing genitalia. And when Thomas Cranmer puts together the Book of Common Prayer,
Oh gosh, yeah.
he systematizes a way of like getting through the Bible like day by day, but he omits a few parts, and he omits this verse from Ezekiel and says, I quote, that it is, he omits those parts which are the least edifying and might best be spared and therefore are left unread. It just made me think of that interesting sort of tidbit of censorship history. My brain was just thinking about the fact that, yeah, okay, in the same way that it's really easy to get up and say, like, dating apps and marketplace and come on, everyone just go to the gym and women will like you. It's just as easy to say, oh, that's also stupid. Oh, and the manosphere doesn't have a good, relationship to love and all of this kind of stuff. And I don't want to make this too cheap because, like, there is some truth in it, right? Like,
Absolutely.
men who go to the gym are stereotypically, maybe even just typically, more attractive, all other things being equal, to women. Some people would say, actually, I prefer a dad bod, I prefer this. That's certainly true, but, like, there's got to be something to it. There's got to be something to the fact that if you are a more, like, confident person and you watch classes on how to become more charismatic, to the extent that they might actually work, which a lot of the time they probably don't, that must actually do something. That it's not like it's this completely, like, baseless movement of people who are totally confused. Like, it does work in some respect. At the very least, the people who a lot of young men are looking up to for advice, even if the advice is kind of like dead or silly, the qualities that they are admiring in that person will not be their tenderness and their ability to quote long passages of Dante, but their biceps and their confidence, right?
Mhm.
So there's got to be something in it.
Yeah, I first will say that I agree that I don't want to make it seem like I'm just crapping on the whole thing and saying it's all worthless. That's obviously not the case. I think maybe sometimes I speak a little bit strongly because it is so dominant, and I think it's important to represent not even a mutually exclusive alternative, but at least partially exclusive and certainly alternative way of being that is underrepresented. Sure, yeah, of course there's value in it, and I mean, how many the highest level, how many lives have been saved by this sort of thing? I'd have thought a lot. How many lives have been improved? A lot. I mean, it's just better to be healthier, and going to gym is part of that, and all this other associated stuff. I think there's virtue there, but and certainly in as much as it relates to dating, I think one of the problems with this conversation, with most conversations of this nature, is that we're constantly trying to provide catch-all solutions or catch-all, this is what men are like, this is what women are like, this is what men want, this is what women want. This is obviously, I mean, this is very obviously not true. That it's basically impossible to speak in those general, in such sweeping terms.
I think you can, like, statistically generalize.
Oh, don't give me statistics. I think that's part of the problem, though.
But it's maybe just like an unhelpful way to think about it, even if it's true. There are some things which, like, statistics might point you in a particular direction, and it might involve a kind of self-deception. Maybe that's just what love needs, man. Like, sometimes it's just not a helpful, like, framework by which to think about things.
So, what is it? Sorry.
Like if there are statistical facts about things that people are attracted to, or things.
Like what? I see.
Like, I don't know, if there was some statistic about, body shape or something. Like, it may just be true that there is a statistically preferable body shape for women.
Okay, true, but irrelevant.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
True.
It's like
it's like, so what? It's like, who cares about what carry on. I feel like
What I was just thinking is that, like, in the way I'm saying, well, there's got to be some truth in this. There's also some truth in, like, the medieval way of setting up marriage. Like, you want, like, the medieval red pill. It's like, son, I know that you think you're in love, but this is a fleeting emotion, which is a terrible thing to build a relationship on. Like, have you got any money? Has she got any money? Because if you don't, you're going to have these arguments. Are your values aligned? Like, think about how people might talk today. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna be real with you here. You know, like, you got to have a conversation about whether you know, is she a feminist and you're a conservative? Like, red pill, bro. Like, down the line, that's going to cause you trouble, because when you raise some children, you know, you've got to. It's all very sort of like practical wisdom, and in a way, that has more in common with the way that people would have viewed marriage before. In saying, like, okay, there's like this happy-go-lucky love stuff, which is like great, that's very fun and all, but like, switch your brain on for a second and you realize this is a better way of doing things. But the romantic says it's just not a better way of doing things, even if it's true. Even if it's true that I'm not going to have any money and that I'm going to have trouble raising my kids. It's like...
that is all romantic. And I think it's really important what you mentioned there, right? Because this love stuff, romance, it's not necessarily good.
Yeah, but that's it, right? It's like, because if you want to say, like, well, all of this kind of, you know, properly organizing marriages around, like, what makes sense familially and in terms of money, and this dating market stuff about statistics and, you know, making yourself a more viable person and increasing your sperm count, that's not what love is all about. Some people might go like, okay, then love is a fool's errand, and we should be focusing on the other stuff. But it's kind of the attitude.
But I think essentially you've got to have true love. Like, as I said, it's not convenient, right? Like, true love just completely upends your life. Like, all the things you thought you believed in, something like, I don't know if I do, and things you're supposed to care about, you don't know if you do care about them anymore, and it keeps you awake at night. You worry, you get stressed, and you get really sad. But then also you're related in a way you never have been before. No, this is so important. Like, yeah, people think they want love, but I think maybe they don't. Maybe they do just want something more stable and successful, which is, this isn't about better or worse, but that's also to be praised. But yeah, I think we've got to recognise that.
Yes, remember the true love of Paris and Helen of Troy launched 1,000 ships.
Well, that wasn't true love. I think because Paris gave, you know, at the wedding of, who was it, Achilles' mother and whoever it was, Paris, you know, Strife gives the golden apple and says, this belongs to the fairest. The goddesses go to Paris. He picks Aphrodite. I think Athena promises him, like, political dominion, and I can't remember what the other one promises him, and then Aphrodite promises him the most beautiful woman in the world if he chooses her the apple. He gives her the apple, so he gets Helen. She doesn't even like. That's the funny thing about the Iliad. Helen's constantly moaning about how much of a coward and how much of an idiot of Paris is. And then it's a funny book, that. Really funny.
Paris loves Helen.
Yeah, he seems to love her.
And he seemed relatively willing.
And look, man, we got a big war.
Look what happened.
We got a bloody good book from it, a load of great poetry.
That's true.
You know, it's like Orson Welles says in The Third Man. You seen The Third Man?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Carol Reed, written by Graham Greene. I think it was once voted the best British film ever made. Set in Vienna, 1947. It's an amazing film. Anyway, there's a line in it where Orson Welles, his character, he says, and his friend is kind of having a go at him because he's indulging in a life of crime. And he's like, look, in Italy in the 15th century, in the 16th century, under the Medici and the Borgias and all these warring families, and there was all this strife, chaos, conquering, plague, all of this, right? Despite all of the political chaos and strife, you got the Renaissance. And then he says in Switzerland, you know, 500 years of peace and brotherly love, and when you get the cuckoo clock, basically. And it's a nice way of thinking about the difference between peace and war.
So should we?
Okay, that's one hell of a tangent, but I think it might bring us back around.
Should we be going after love then?
Yeah, exactly.
The way that you've just described it, like, if you were talking to a robot who had no feeling of love, and they said, oh, what is this love thing? You said, well, love completely upends your life. It's inconvenient. It rubs against the grain. It sometimes involves self-deception. It involves abandoning your family and betraying your friends. And it can launch wars. And the robot's like, so what's the...
Good literature would come out of it.
And you're just like, it just feels good, man. Like, Is that a good enough
Maybe
justification?
not, but it's the most alive you can ever feel. The most alive, I think. The most like burningly and deeply alive in a way. It's transcendental. And it's funny you mention the thing you've got to experience it. I guess it's like any sort of argument from experiences. It's like meditating. You know, people. I mean, I've never tried it, but people talk about meditating from the Hindu or Buddhist tradition. It's like you can't actually understand it just by reading about it. But once you've meditated and you've connected to the universal one, then you'll understand it. Or if you're a propagandist for drugs, I guess it's like, trying to convince someone to take psychedelics. It's like, you won't know until you've done it, then you'll see it. I guess ultimately love is the same thing. It's just that we have this wealth of material going back to the beginning of human civilization about how good it is because it feels great. But yeah, it is destructive. I don't know.
You're obsessed with drugs, aren't you?
Yeah,
You're just obsessed.
but love is a drug, they say, which is
It is.
true, but kind of it's a bit of a boring cliche.
I think it's probably easier to imagine when you think about the love that a parent has for a child, in that it's a different kind of love, of course, one hopes. But when you say things like, like it's really impractical and you've got to quit your job if you want to provide and you've got to, like give up your pastimes to work a second job to raise money so you can go to college or whatever. And I think there's kind of no question about whether that's the right thing to do for most people, because even if you haven't experienced the love of a child, people understand that it is just one of the most powerful psychological, biological drives that exist.
But you have to sacrifice a lot for a child, right?
Exactly, that's what I mean, and I think it's easier to accept that because in a way, once you have a child, it's your child, and there's this feeling of there's no choice in the matter. The reason it feels more like a choice you have to make, whether it's worth making that sacrifice for romantic love, is because you could love this person or not. You could cut them out of your life and they would have nothing to do with you, and there's no connection, they're not biologically related, there's nothing, and you get to make that choice. But if you've decided or found out that you do love them as powerfully as you might love a child or something, people trivially would do all kinds of things for their son or their daughter, and I guess that's probably the way that people treat romantic love too. But it is irrational.
It's right. I think yes, maybe a nice way to kind of just not put a lid on that exactly, but to kind of summarise, I think what this conversation is driving towards. It's not so much even directing people towards that thing entirely, but it's at least recognising that it does exist and it is possible, and laying it down as an option that may be worth pursuing, and saying that even in the 21st century, in 2025, this overwhelming transcendental love can still be achieved and is worth. I think maybe I do have to say, and I do think it is worth aiming at, and I do think it is better than the alternatives. I mean, I certainly hope that if anybody is still listening and wonders if it is possible and worth pursuing, I think it is. And it's risky, but what is worth having that isn't risky in the pursuit of it?
Yes.
You obviously have to sacrifice things and you may have to lose things, but that's true of all in life that's worth having. And there's a really interesting kind of parallel here between religious language, I think, and the language we use to talk about love. They're very similar. And even in its practical sense, I mean, if you were to follow Christian scripture to the word, you would have to, you tell me if I'm wrong, Alex, you're an expert, but you'd have to give up all your possessions, right? You'd have to stop pursuing any sort of material career in life and go and live among the poor and the sickly. And if I told my mother I wanted to quit my job, not that I really have a real job, but stop doing whatever the hell I'm doing, give away everything I have, and go and live with the sick and the poor, she should be more upset than if I said I wanted to run away, elope with someone I love, I think. Anyway, that's just something that occurred to me then, this interesting parallel between a true embrace of religion and of love. But this is also reminding me of something else. Just something else I can go back to on, just maybe a quite interesting point, I think, about why this kind of love is, we don't talk about it as much, we find it harder maybe to achieve, perhaps. Something you mentioned earlier, I think you've got to be willing to die for it. And I think most people would accept, I'd like to think, at least notionally, that they would be willing to die for their child. But I don't know how often people would be willing to die for much else in the modern world. I think everything in the 21st century, we sort of live as if the point of life is to live for as long as possible. The end game of life is to keep living, is how we treat it. right? It's like everything we do is fine-tuned towards making us safer and healthier, which is obviously good up to a point, but you can go too far. There are so many different examples of this, and one of the most interesting is with like fire safety. Okay, we don't want our buildings to burn down because it's awful. It's awful. But equally, if you make a building as fire safe as possible, it's not a building you would want to live in, right? And I think that's true of life more generally. And I think we're really heading towards a society that prioritizes life
Absolutely true.
itself
Above living.
too highly. And you know, this Juvenal has this great line. I wish I could quote it in Latin, but I can't. But it's something like, what is it? For the sake of living, to throw away the reasons for living, or something like that. And I think that's what we're doing. And that, weirdly enough, connects to love. I don't think we really believe in jeopardy and risk and death anymore. And I think if you're not willing to die for it, then maybe it's not romance. You know, that probably sounds silly to some people.
No.
Sounds a bit romantic.
It sounds a bit romantic, sure. Maybe I've read too many books. And maybe, you know, who knows if I really believe it. I guess we'll see if ever I'm put to the test. We'll see if I do believe it, but I'd like to think I do. If you know, your friend, Camus, what did he say? The meaning of life is whatever's stopping you from killing yourself. Is that what
Yes.
Camus said?
Camus did say that.
My,
At least that's attributed to him. I'm not. Sometimes that does happen, doesn't it?
very often
The
happens.
meaning of life being literally whatever is stopping you
Yeah,
from killing yourself.
my
It is.
counterpoint, not in a literal sense. My take on that is the meaning of life is whatever you're willing to die for, and I think that applies in some strange way to love. Anyway, we're probably getting a little bit high in the clouds now.
I think-
Socrates and all the rest.
I think what you're saying is true, and it can sound a bit lofty, but then romance is lofty.
Yeah.
I think when I was talking to Rabbi David Wolpe on the show, I think it was him who said something like the idea that like friendship is just injustice, or, like by definition. That's just like what friendship is. It's like being willing
Yeah, I
to
remember.
basically unjustly prioritize the desires of one person over another. And I guess that's a form of sacrifice. In that case, you're sacrificing ethics. There's a sense in which you want to say if two people are drowning, there should be no reason to save one over the other because they're both equally valuable. But
Unless one
most
of them
people
is
would
my
save their friend over a stranger. And that makes sense to people. And I think a lot of people listening wouldn't even think that would be the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
But it does seem, in a sort of stripped back literal sense, unjust. And if you're Peter Singer, perhaps irrational. And maybe, yeah, that is kind of what love is and has to be. And then you've got to make a choice as to whether you want to throw yourself in with the romantics or with people who will have stable lives and incomes and, you know...
Sure. I think we should try and make a case for the fact that these aren't
There's
mutually
no virtue.
exclusive. And I mean, love is a really interesting. I mean, you know, I guess I didn't realize until not so many years ago how much love was discussed in philosophy.
Mhm.
Right? Because as it probably shows, steered clear of philosophy as much as I can for most of my life. And it's surprising
Well, what is philosophy, Sheehan?
fine, sure. Yeah, I mean, as in, you know, capital F.
Love
Okay,
of wisdom.
if you go to Foibles and it's in the philosophy section, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I
okay.
guess. Yes, love of wisdom. But I didn't realize how much, like, romantic love and love of friendship, I didn't realize how much that stuff is discussed in both, I guess, in theology and philosophy. I've always approached it thinking, okay, you know, philosophy is about abstract concepts, theology is about God, and then art, that's where you found love, you know, in paintings and music and literature and films.
No.
But it turns out philosophy, people talk about love constantly, right? And they're always trying to figure out what it
Things
is, what
are
its
not
role is,
separate.
and so on and so
It's
forth.
the two places philosophy and theology go wrong. Philosophy goes wrong when it becomes so coldly analytical that it basically doesn't have any content anymore, and it's just a bunch of P's and Q's and symbols.
Mhm.
And theology goes wrong when it forgets that the thing that's supposed to be under discussion, certainly in Christian theology, is God. And what is God? He is literally love itself. And so Christian theology, at least proper, is about love.
Mhm.
And philosophy, maybe not so straightforwardly about love, but shouldn't abandon the personal Some people, swear by that and die on that hill. They say that, that's the reason analytic philosophy is invented as a way to try to mathematize this quite
Right.
sort of airy-fairy, all over the place philosophical ideas.
Has it been good for the world?
There's no
philosophy?
systematization of it. Has it been good for the world? Yes, but it might not have been good for the philosophers. Because it's really useful as a perspective. If you want to see, can this view be formalized and proven? And analytic philosophy is certainly useful in disproving ideas. If you formalize something and it's a contradiction, then you know it must be false. But there's a reason why, broadly speaking, people see two traditions of philosophy, and they see them as separate. The analytical and the so-called continental. And the continental strand is the narrative, the artsy, that contains something indispensable, such that it's not like philosophy just became analytical and improved in that sense, in the way that science, mathematized, science became something that started to be about maths and proof and systems. It didn't keep the prior stuff. Astronomy didn't branch off from astrology, and both are both considered sciences to the same degree by the academic discipline of a science department in a university. But in philosophy, they couldn't abandon that stuff. The mathematization and syllogization was not a development or an improvement. It was a detour or a nook to dive into. But it can never be philosophy in its totality. And that's what I think a lot of people are surprised, as you are, to realize, when you look at philosophy and what people care about as a whole, it's got a lot more to do with that than...
Yeah, and also a lot about love, what it means, and what exactly it is.
I think so. And like I say, it's easy to sort of wax lyrical, not only about how great love is, but also how the modern world has totally messed it up and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's true.
No, I just mean to say that I'm hoping that speaking with you like this, I think it's interesting. It's not just as simple as that,
Yeah, it's not as simple as and I it's important. It's so easy to take swings at the modernity. As I say, it's all people have ever done throughout history.
Yeah.
The one constant is that all they do is moan about how things are. And there was even this guy called William Harrison in the 1570s. He was part of this project to kind of write a kind of a history of the world, basically. But his job in this, the smaller job, which was just to write an account of contemporary England. So he just went around England, looking at maps and speaking to people to create an account of contemporary life in Elizabethan England. And it's so interesting how much of this stuff sounds like it could have been written today. The most obvious example being he's talking to these old guys and they're just complaining about the fact that rent is going up year after year after year after year, and all the landlords, all they care about is wringing as much as they can out of these poor tenants. I mean, that was in the 1570s, and obviously you could be saying that now in 2025. So my point being, just taking swings at modernity is so easy. I don't think we're sitting here saying, well, we used to have it good, now we've messed it up, now it's crap. It's more like, okay, we know that there are things we're dissatisfied with, things that we're missing out on. Is there anything from the past that could help us figure out how to get to that thing? It's not about good versus bad, it's not about better versus worse, it's just about whether or not the past can help us find a better route through the thorny future that we kind of see dimly ahead of us.
And for me, it is probably this implicit assumption in the history of romantic thought that love is supposed to be sometimes a bit foolish. It's supposed to rub against the grain. It's supposed to be something irrational.
I think that's what we need. Are you saying that's what we need now?
I think probably, or at least a recognition of that. It might still not be a risk you think is worth taking, but it's worth reminding yourself that if that's what you do want, if love is what you're after, that's probably where you're going to find it.
I think so. I would agree. I think that is something that we can point to and say, look, the modern world needs a bit of that, because it is becoming increasingly stale. But I mean, I've got to say, in recent months, the world has become a bit more interesting. And I do sometimes wonder if all the political developments of recent times are a product of boredom on the part of people who are just in a kind of in a state of life that's just far too advanced. I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. But yeah, I think now things are, notwithstanding the political stuff, day to day, it's convenient. It's ever more convenient. But it's boring. Who likes getting Deliveroo? like, you know, like he was like, oh man, I live in 2025. I can just get freaking burritos delivered to my door
It's
whenever
cool
I
when you
want.
think about it. It's cool to
Yeah, if we sit down,
to say, but isn't it awesome that we
you don't
can
do that. And I don't think anyone likes this convenient life we're living. I mean, if you deprived us of these conveniences, maybe we'd appreciate them more. But I don't even know if that's true. Like, if you force someone to live without a car for a year, they'd probably get used to it. Think, you know what? Why the hell did I? It's like quitting smoking, right? Like,
Yeah.
or drinking. These things, when you're doing them, are great, and it's hard to stop. But when you manage to do it, you're like, actually, why? What if you can manage to do it? You think, why did I ever do that in the first place? I didn't need.
The problem is with stuff like the car or social media or whatever. It's not just you that needs to stop. It's society.
It's society.
You need to get everyone else to stop. And that's the problem too. When you said earlier that you can just like, oh, you can just not use Tinder. It's like not just the effect that something like Tinder would have on you. It's the effect that Tinder has on everybody. You can be the person who doesn't use dating apps and you walk into the bar. But everyone's mindset about dating has
been already
shifted and been reshaped.
Well,
Same thing with pornography. You can give up pornography and you can reorient yourself to true romance. But people that you're surrounded by might not have managed to do that, and so it's a little bit harder in that regard. Which is why I think it's something we need to remember on a more.
No, I was literally just thinking as you were talking about we have been kind of in the clouds a little bit, and if anybody is listening, what my interest more than anything is, okay, that's all well and good. Like, we're convinced that romance is beautiful and worth pursuing. We're like, fine, then how the hell do you do it in 2025? Sure, but I think it's got so much to unpack there. The first thing though is there is hope, right? We aren't living in this sort of end game where everyone is in the Matrix. That hasn't happened yet. Like, plenty of people either don't use dating apps or use them a little bit and use them and are still fine. It's not like if you use them once, your just brain's poisoned forever. It's very easy to be hyperbolic about this stuff. I think it's funny, literally, it's actually almost the opposite is true. That things are actually pretty good, and it's just that little 0.5% of opening your eyes a little bit wider or looking in a slightly different place. Suddenly it's like, actually, everything's great. I'm not thinking there are plenty of people out there who you could, let's say, meet. Who haven't been sort of had their brains and hearts and souls completely eviscerated by the modern world. I think there are very few people, if anybody, who's reached that level of sort of spiritual and emotional and psychological degradation.
It's not as bad as it seems. Maybe the motif of history is it's always better than it was before, but always feels like it's probably worse.
Yeah,
would have been better in the past.
Always. Without like golden age is always in the past, aren't they?
Yes, and people forget about the smell.
People forget about the picture. They do.
Yeah.
Looking to the future, I guess. I don't know. Maybe one day we will just have to ban the internet. I don't know. Like, it sounds crazy, but strange things have happened, right? We're slowly but surely winning the war on smoking, as vaping has appeared. But when it comes to something like the internet and social media and dating apps, like, we suffer from them now. But in 50 years, that's a long time. These things can.
But banning smoking in closed door, we can do something with internet.
No, I agree. Banning the internet was
That's a complicated matter because, like, a lot of people want to claim a sort of performative free speech when it comes to pornography. That might be legally difficult, but certainly the idea of regulating it, not just the industry of production, but consumption to the extent that no child should ever be watching it.
Yeah, absolutely, without doubt. But I think to maybe just come full circle. Although there are broader social changes that need to take place.
And we force kids to read Dante as well.
Exactly. Well, yeah. But the thing is, then when you force them to read it, it's not as good. You've got to kind of come across it by choice, right? You've got to stumble upon Dante and fall in love with it. But the point being that despite these broader social changes that may need to happen to reach this utopia that we'll never reach, that crap almost doesn't matter. Like, when does society ever change in ways that we really wanted to without further repercussions that we didn't foresee? That's just, we can go on forever. But in your life, day to day, year by year, month by month, minute by minute, there are small things that you can do to embrace a slightly different way of living. And one of them could be not using dating apps, a little bit boring. One of them might be reading Dante. Okay, that's quite exciting. One of them, might be learning just to bloody look up every once in a while. And I look at the sky and think, bloody hell, the sky is blue. Like, that's just... How? How is this? It's just, it almost want to cry. It's miraculous. There's a blue sky out there. It's blue. There's a big blue thing up there. And you learn to embrace these little wonders, and suddenly life, despite everything else, isn't so bad. And you don't need to rely on politicians to do it for you. And nor do you need to rely on podcasters or pseudo-intellectuals like you or me. You can just go out and, there's plenty of beauty and love in the flowers and the trees. God, that sounds a little bit wishy-washy, but it's true. There's a reason we've been saying it for all of history. Anyway,
there's a reason so much poetry has been dedicated to that cause.
Yes.
There's always time. That's the other thing. It's always timeless. Read a poem from however long ago. If it's not about society, if it's about nature or about love, it's timeless. Immediately timeless. So you can understand, notwithstanding the language barrier, there's no context, there's nothing you need to learn. You can just if I gave you Dante's love poetry now, you wouldn't need to know anything about the politics of 13th century Italy. You would just get it, right? So whereas it's funny then, because think about the podcast we're all doing now, the Manosphere stuff. In 100 years, it will probably be completely gibberish, because so much of it is fine-tuned towards the society we're living in now.
True.
Which isn't like it. That's fair
Absolutely.
enough. That's why it works. But it's an interesting metric for looking at stuff. Like, will it make sense to people 500 years from now or 100 years from
It
now?
hardly makes sense
doesn't,
1 week from now.
Then maybe it's not as worth your time as it seems.
Yeah.
There we go.
Might even be gibberish right now. That remains to be seen. Shane Quirk, thanks for coming back on.
That's always a pleasure, and of course, do consider buying my book.
Oh yeah, the book.
It's
Bloody
the
hell,
book,
it's in the description.
It's in the description.
Yeah,
I've written
mentioned it.
against all odds. I've written a book.
Let's not milk it. They know that it's down there.
Okay.